We welcome him tonight to talk about creating a great relationship that goes deeper than dirty dishes. Welcome, Ari.
Well, thank you for having me. Let me share my screen real quick here. And hopefully this looks good and everybody can see it. So, whoops. All right. So there we go. Does that look good?
That's great.
All right. Good deal. So thanks to Ellen and the rest of the undoubtedly small but dedicated crew who runs Bergen County Chad. I know how these chapters work. There's usually a tireless small core of people who do all the work. It's great to be here. Ellen and I have been talking for a long time about the possibility of me actually doing something in person because, like, I am a kid from Tenafly, right? I went from first to 12th grade through the Tenafly public schools. My mom still lives in Englewood. My dad had been a psychologist for, I don't know, 30 years in Teaneck. And actually his old office mate, Laura Eisdorfer, is here as well. So that's kind of a cool connection to the past here. So what we're going to talk about is how does ADHD impact relationships? And in the 20 something years that I've been focusing on ADHD, initially I really focused a lot on kind of like the practical stuff, right? Like, how do you get places on time? How do you keep your stuff organized? How do you set priorities and stay focused, right? And it's all good stuff. I mean, it is indeed important, but more and more as I kind of, I don't know, expanded my practice and expanded my thinking and interest, I came to realize that, like, you know what, this is about relationships, right? That's the thing that we're missing. That's really the important part that I don't think gets quite enough attention in the world of living and managing ADHD. So that has become kind of these last however many years, really kind of my big focus. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. So, as I said, like, all the basic practical skills of like managing life with ADHD, or frankly, for any of us, right, managing life, it is important. And certainly, like, we all want to strive to be our best or whatever, right? You want to be more on time. You want to be more on top of things. You want to make like better choices about what you're doing. All good stuff. But at the end of the day, like, I don't know, do you need to be 100% on time for every single thing in life in order to be happy? I don't know, not necessarily. I mean, it's important, it's worth working on, but you don't have to be completely perfect in all ways in order to live a happy life and have a happy relationship. But to really have a happy relationship, like, that's often one of the big drivers of happiness, right? That if you look at the research on life satisfaction, on life meaningfulness, it's a good relationship, right? Romantic relationships, family, friends, coworkers. So to keep those relationships satisfying, besides just obviously being lucky that you have good people in your life, right? Like, you got to work on yourself. And the truth of it is, the way to have good people in your life is to earn having good people in your life by being good yourself. And that is sort of what we're going to be talking about today. And this kind of brings up a line that I use a lot, which is, a good relationship pushes you to become a better person. And this is kind of a big one, right? Because as much as we all have our list of complaints about our partner, or about other things in the world, right? And okay, fine, there's truth in it, but still, in a good relationship, we are each working on ourselves, right? We're working on the relationship, we're pushing each other, and we're pushing ourselves. And if we're talking about a long-term relationship, so one that survives the years and the decades, to keep your sex life going well, which is, an important part of relationships, that requires some hard work. So the couples who are really doing well outside of bed and in bed are those who are really kind of doing that hard work to understand themselves, to understand each other, and to be a good team together. So obviously, ADHD is an individual condition, meaning one person has it. I mean, could be both in a relationship, or if we're talking about families where people are genetically related to each other, probably more than one person in a family has ADHD. But nonetheless, it is one person who has it. Except, of course, in relationships, we bring all of ourselves to the relationship. So if one person has ADHD, they bring that with them, and their partner also then has it in their life, maybe not in their brain wiring, but they have it in their life. Just like, I don't know, if you have I don't know, a hell of a record collection or something, right? You bring that to a relationship as well. Um, we know that ADHD is highly genetic. So often when you diagnose one person with ADHD, you probably don't have to look that far before you find somebody else in the family tree who also has ADHD. Often you get what I call the 2-for-1 diagnosis, right? This is where some kid gets identified because, pediatricians are pretty on top of ADHD. Teachers like really on top of ADHD. Teachers are really good at knowing what is like developed appropriate for like this age. So if you teach uh, so if you teach sixth graders, what's average for sixth graders, right? So like you're going to pick up the kids who are not quite, let's just say, on the tall part of the bell curve in various ways. And so kids get diagnosed, and then mom or dad goes, oh, that sounds familiar. How about that? Right. So kids often lead to parents getting diagnosed. So, but what we also know about ADHD is that the effects of ADHD don't end when the bell rings. They don't end at the end of the school year, and they don't end at the, graduation from high school. That if you're a kid with ADHD, assuming you survive into adulthood, you will probably become an adult who has ADHD. Now, might be a little bit different, right? Some of that stuff does catch up. Some of those executive functions and whatnot do begin to catch up in early to mid 20s. But probably some of that still remains. Now, the world is a different place in some ways for good and in some ways for bad as an adult in the world compared to as a kid or a teen. But nonetheless, ADHD sort of sticks around. And what we know is that it affects every part of life. It can affect how you do at home, how you do at work, how you do in your relationships. And it's the part on relationships that we're going to talk about here tonight. So Russell Barkley, who is like indisputably the world's expert on ADHD, super brilliant guy. He's a man of many awesome lines, but here is one that gets used a lot, which is ADHD is not a disorder of knowing what to do. It's a disorder of doing what you know. And I quote this line all the time. So all that stuff of like, why did you leave late? You knew this was important, right? Like the knowing is the easy part. Knowing you should leave on time is easy. Actually doing it, and not once in a blue moon, not once for a special occasion, but like consistently, that is the harder part. And among many other things, part of what makes it hard is knowing I should leave on time requires you to then know, oh, it is now that time. Hey, how about that? That time has arrived, and now I am doing that thing of leaving, right? So knowing it is easy, but losing weight is also easy on paper, right? Eat less, exercise more, bam, you just lost weight, right? Except it's not that easy, is it? Right? In real life, it's doing things consistently, day after day, week after week, month after month. That is the hard part. And none of us are perfect and none of us are robots, but folks with ADHD especially struggle with that consistency. They can do anything once or twice or 10 or 20, but doing it consistently, that is the hard part of ADHD. So, ADHD, like I said, it's an individual condition. So in a couple, perhaps one partner has ADHD and one partner doesn't. Now, we all got other things going, but whatever. But ADHD then, when one partner has it, it can create certain relationship dynamics, right? That they become more likely, just as other various circumstances make other different relationship dynamics more likely. But ADHD can impact that partner's ability to be the partner that they want to be. So in other words, I want to be that consistent, reliable partner that you hope me to be. but it also impacts the non-ADHD partner's ability to be the partner that they want to be. So in other words, like, I sometimes want to be the fun, laid back one, right? Why do I have to be the one who manages all the details, for example? Um, the types of mistakes and struggles that folks with ADHD make can be really easy to personalize, right? Like, you're really good at remembering your stuff, but you don't remember my stuff. I guess you don't really, value my things as much as yours. Um, Not a crazy idea, right? You could see why someone might jump to that conclusion. Not necessarily accurate. It's not actually what's going on there, but it's not a crazy idea to come to. But unfortunately, also on the other side of the coin, for the person who has ADHD, it's easy to get defensive, right? Like, oh, again, really? Like, I got to be the one to take the fall on this. Somebody messed up. It's always got to be me, right? It's always my fault when something doesn't work out. At a certain point, it's sort of like, enough already. Why do I always have to be the one who's wrong around here? So, in general, then, when it comes to relationships, often relationships function best when there's some balance there, in that, you know, we sort of ask a lot of our romantic partners at this point in history here, where we want partners who are reliable and consistent and supportive, right? Because adulthood does have boring responsibilities after all. But we also want partners who are kind of fun and interesting and exciting, and make life more than just work, right? So, like, we want both of these things from a partner. And it can become this situation where, if one partner, I'm going to let you guess which one this happens to be, is really good at being reliable, consistent, and supportive, and the other partner, and I'll let you use the process of elimination to figure out who this one might be, is really good at the fun and the exciting and the interesting, it can become this situation where they do this thing called polarizing, where one of them is fun and is reliable and consistent, the other one's fun and interesting. And then it's like, oh, you are such a stick in the mud, man. If we don't have some fun tonight, we never have fun. So they become more fun. Meanwhile, this partner is saying, like, man, you're so irresponsible. If I don't take care of everything, then, this house is going to go to hell in a handbasket. So they become even more focused on the reliable and consistent, and partners push each other further out. And the joke that I have here is that it's basically like one partner becomes like a life insurance salesman, and the other becomes a roadie for Motley Crue, right? Where they're like completely different from where they started. And when you get to this point where you're in this massive tug of war, nobody's winning, nobody's having fun, and probably nobody's having sex, at least with their partner. So that's what we want to avoid. And we're going to talk about how to actually find a bit more common ground and kind of enjoy each other's, the strengths that each person brings to the relationship. So I have a line that I use, which is, ADHD doesn't invent new problems. It just exacerbates the universal ones. So the stuff that individuals with ADHD struggle with, the stuff that couples with one ADHD partner struggle with, not new, not unique, not different, just more, right? Like, every couple has to deal with differences of opinion. Every couple has to deal with different ways of handling things, different priorities, different ways of being in the world, right? That's not unique to couples where one partner has ADHD. So, but especially when ADHD isn't well managed and it's not well understood by one or both members of the couple, it's going to be much bigger. It's going to have an outsized impact on how this couple does day by day, how they do with each other, and how they do with managing just like, the demands of life, and trying to carve out a little bit of fun and sort of meaningfulness in it all. So I'm going to give like a super quick, like 2-slide, or 3 slides here on what my kind of current way of understanding ADHD. In other words, what makes ADHD ADHD? What makes folks with ADHD a bit different from folks who don't have ADHD? And this sort of model I have of kind of how I think about it, it's definitely based a lot on Barclay's work. But I think it's a more useful way of kind of thinking about this, of sort of understanding it. And It helps people sort of feel a bit better, like, oh yeah, now I get it. And it also helps kind of point us towards better strategies and solutions and ways of kind of managing the demands of life. So um, according to Barclay's response inhibition theory of ADHD, which is like incredibly complicated and probably like, you know, if you were bad in class, you're going to have to read this book kind of thing, right? That's like a punishment to have to read it because it's so dense. But man, there's so much brilliance in there. And according to Barclay's response inhibition theory of ADHD, basically what makes ADHD is that folks with ADHD have a harder time kind of like putting on the brakes and pausing and not responding to a new stimulus. So that could be like, hey, what's that over there? Or here I am working on something super important. Oh, I just got a text. I wonder what it, oh, it's from Instagram. Always important things on Instagram, definitely more important than working my report right now. 7 hours later, right? So put on the brakes and say, nope, this isn't the time. I'm gonna, oh, there's nope, that's not the thing. This is the thing. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm focusing on. And that folks with ADHD have a harder time kind of putting on the brakes. They're more pulled by the world around them. They're not more pulled by the thoughts inside their own head. So because of this, folks with ADHD are very much sort of in the present, in a way that it makes it harder to sort of pause and say, like, wait a second, what does history teach us about this situation? In the past, when I've been in this situation, what have I done and how has it worked out, right? To access that wisdom, or hindsight, as it's called, you need to pause for a sec. And folks with ADHD have this kind of frustrating habit. They keep doing the same stuff, even though it never worked out before, right? And then you ask them why, and they're like, I don't know, I just didn't think of it, which is exactly true. Or alternatively, they struggle with forethought. So instead of looking back into the past, talk about looking forward into the future. Let me think about it. Here's what I need to do. How's this going to go? Oh, I've got a meeting in Manhattan at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday a.m. How bad could it be getting over the GW? I'll leave at 8:30, right? Like, clearly, no, that's a terrible idea. You will not get there leaving at 8:30. But that to stop and think and this and this, but then that, and if I did this, and right, like that pausing to really mull through the possibilities, you got to put on the brakes first in order to do that. And that's where folks with ADHD struggle. So they sort of tend to leap quickly based on whatever's right in front of them, which may not contain all the information they need to consider at that moment. So this brings us to a couple of concepts. One of them is that folks with ADHD tend to have a shorter time horizon. So in other words, here I am on Monday. I got that big thing due on Friday, which could be, a sophomore history paper if I'm a student, or it could be like I got this big report for work, or like all the neighbors are coming over on Friday night, back in a time when people used to do that. So here I am 4 days from now, I got this big thing. How much do I feel the pressure of the moment? How much am I really kind of thinking about Friday or Thursday night here on Monday? Folks with ADHD, they tend not to look as far down the road. And it's not because they're like obsessively ruminating necessarily. It's more like kind of apathetic procrastination and then frantic scrambling. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, Thursday midnight, whoa, boom, the rocket goes off. Here we go. Now my brain is on. Now let's get this thing done. Meanwhile, of course, their spouse, perhaps on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, is having a panic attack. So I sometimes say that ADHD often causes anxiety. It's just not always necessarily in the person who has ADHD. So we'll talk about how do you kind of wrestle out that dynamic between two partners who kind of feel time a little differently. The other kind of concept here is something called temporal discounting. This is a term from economics, but that the further out a reward or punishment is in time, the less you feel it now. So this is why everybody, all people, are really bad at saving for retirement. Because like, well, I don't know, I could go out to dinner tonight. That'd be lovely. Or I could put, $50 into retirement and, 40 years from now, boy, is that $50 going to be worth a whole lot more than one dinner. That is true. Except right now, I'd really like to go out to dinner. So, we'll contribute next month. So for folks with ADHD, whatever is happening right now. Ooh, one more show. Okay, just one more. I know it's midnight, but one more episode. This is too good. I can't not watch it. Click. Or I should really sort all these receipts for taxes, because 11 months from now, boy, am I going to be happy I did it. Too hard to do, right? So like whatever really grabs them in the moment is much more likely to get their time and attention compared to things that are more about the future. So this leads to my unofficial slogan of ADHD time management, which is by the time you feel it, it's too late. When it's Thursday night and company's coming tomorrow and you're like, oh my God, we don't have a cake or something, right? It's too late. You can't go out at midnight on, well, I guess you sort of can, but bad example. But, like you can't do 6 hours worth of work on a report when there's 4 hours left before the meeting, for example, right? By the time you really feel that pressure, it's too late to go back and change it, to fix it, to do something different. Here we go again. So this is like a super short kind of rushed version of that, like again, 3 slides, but I have a webinar I put up on YouTube that I really kind of run through this in about an hour or so, called ADHD is all about seeing time and feeling the future. So I would encourage you to take a look at that or share it with other people who, might be struggling to understand ADHD. I've also got my 3rd book, which doesn't really talk about this because I wrote that book before I really was thinking about this stuff, but nonetheless, maybe has some helpful stuff, called Understand Your Brain, Get More Done. But let's take a quick sidestep. And even though I'm a psychologist, I don't prescribe medication. And even though we're talking about relationships, I think we need to take a moment here at least and talk about medication for ADHD. So I'm not necessarily the biggest guy on meds for all things in life. But when it comes to ADHD, I'm really a pretty big fan of medication. And the reason why I am is it tends to work really quite well. It's actually the most effective medication in all of psychiatry. The risks and side effects really tend to be pretty manageable. They're often, for many people, they're not that hard to get right if you have a prescriber who knows at least a few things about it. And they just really make a difference. And the difference that they make, I sometimes think of it as they close the gap between intentions and actions. So in other words, I really need to be on time for that 10 o'clock meeting. So let's think for a sec. I should really start getting ready at 9. Yep, that's the plan. I really started, 9 o'clock, I really got to start getting ready. At 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 8:30, 8:45, 8:58. Hey, look at that. It's about 9 o'clock. I should probably start getting ready now. Bam, right? So taking that intention from earlier and actually making it happen in a consistent and predictable way. So, it's definitely true that, with any medication, right, there's always going to be some risks and side effects. And I don't want to pretend that there aren't for the stimulants for ADHD. But I think we need to also note that there are risks and side effects of untreated ADHD as well. And, this possibility that there might be some long-term risk of stimulant use, I think really needs to be balanced against the fact that we have a ton of research that speaks to the risks in the additional struggles that come from ADHD that is not well managed. So, I don't know, without getting into the vaccine debate, it's kind of like that, right? Like we definitely know the risks of not getting the vaccine, I think maybe we can all, feel pretty assured about the vague possibilities of the danger that comes from taking the vaccine. But I won't go there, although I guess I did. So, um, generally speaking, the most preferred, the first line choice medication for ADHD is the extended release stimulant. So stuff like Concerta, which is an extended release version of Ritalin. I don't know if you can hear, my cat is scratching to get into the door. And here's the problem. I will let her in. In 10 seconds later, she's going to want to go out. So, working from home. So, Concerta, Adderall XR, in this case, XR means extended release, or Vyvanse, which is sort of a cousin of Adderall, by far the first choice. And a slogan that I use is, if you can't tell whether or not it's working, then it's not working. If you're like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, I guess I think, I think it kind of not good enough, right? If you're not dead clear, yeah, no, seriously, I can tell the difference. And by the way, I can tell when it's wearing off. And by the way, it lasts at least like 10 hours, preferably closer to 12. If you can't definitively say that, you're probably not on the right dose. And not only should you know, you, the person who takes it, but also your partner should also know, unless they just don't happen to be present for that part of the day when it's working, depending on how schedules line up. But certainly on weekends, they should be able to tell the difference. So romantic partner input, I think, is often helpful in terms of like, just a second set of eyes to see what the medication might be doing. So let's talk about ADHD and relationships and how it shows up, and how to create a situation that both people can be happier with. So, I've mentioned that, well, repeatedly, I mentioned that the big thing about ADHD is inconsistency. And, part of what we look for in relationships is a certain amount of kind of predictability, right? I want to know that you're the person today that you were yesterday. I want to know what to expect of you. I want to know that I can count on you. And the non-ADHD partner often feels like, I don't know that I can count on you. Like sometimes you kill it and you're like so on target, and that's great. And I really appreciate it. You'll totally go the extra mile or 10 for me or the kids or whatever. And then other times you're just like gone, MIA. I don't know what you're doing, but you're not here. Or physically you're here, but mentally you're not, right? And that it's hard to predict, which makes for a lot more kind of angsting and fretting. But there's also this idea that folks with ADHD, and this is a concept developed by this psychologist from Penn named Russ Ramsey, who he calls it self-mistrust. So it's that ability of like, can I trust myself? If I say, you know what, tomorrow is going to be a better day, or tomorrow when I get to work, I really need to get on top of, I don't know, filing those expense reports or something. Can I really count on myself to do it? I would like to think I could, but seriously, should I count on myself? I don't know. And of course, if you can't count on yourself, how can your partner count on you also? So that inconsistency, then it makes it harder for the partner who has ADHD to really feel effective in the relationship, that they're being the partner they want to be. Makes it harder for the non-ADHD partner to feel secure, right? Are things going to work out the way I need them to work out in order for me not to feel anxious all the time? But also vice versa. The partner with ADHD doesn't feel secure when they're too often on the chopping block. And the non-ADHD partner doesn't feel effective because it's like, I keep bringing this stuff up. We wind up in the same fights. It doesn't change. I don't understand what's happening here. Right. So, especially when ADHD isn't it hasn't been diagnosed and is not well managed, things just like spiral up and up and up. And by the time they show up in my office or call somebody's office, it's usually a pretty bad scene. And both partners feel just sort of burned out and tired, and like they're not getting their needs met, and nobody knows how to make it better. So, as I mentioned before, ADHD exacerbates the universal struggles, but it doesn't reinvent them. So ADHD then it's easy to sort of make it the scapegoat. I wouldn't be so anxious if you weren't so unreliable. I wouldn't be so micromanagey if you were just more consistent about doing what I asked you to do. Sure, easy, right? Like it makes sense on the surface. But yet every couple, ADHD or not, still has to figure out like, how do we balance this out? How do we sort of decide what gets done and how and by who and maybe even when? Um, so, just because you and your partner have a disagreement may or may not be related to ADHD. So, I don't know, like the example I use here is I had a couple I was seeing where guy had ADHD, was sort of it was inconsistently managed, I'll say. For the wife, the big thing was I need the beds made before we leave the house. It just gives me a sense of calm when I come back into the house at the end of a stressful day. And for me, this is a thing that's important. Fine. That's a reasonable request to make. Personally, I don't get it because I don't care about making beds, but whatever, that's fine for her. If this is a thing that's important to her, I'm glad she's clear about asking for it. The guy sucked at making the bed. Now, is this because his Adderall hadn't kicked in yet? Maybe. Is this because he got distracted with other things? Maybe. Is this because he doesn't care at all about making beds, no matter how much Adderall he takes? Also, that, right? Like, it's all of these things. So, just because there's a disagreement, just because there's a difference where your partner is not, nailing it in terms of what you're hoping for from them, may not be a symptom of ADHD. It might just be a difference. Now, having said that, it could also be a thing where it might be reasonable for her to say, I want you to take your Adderall earlier in the morning because I need you to help with the kids' lunches. I want you to help make the beds because for me, that is what I'm asking of you. If you could do those things for me, you don't have to understand it, but I'm asking this of you. If you can manage that, then we will both be happier. Fine. That's again, that is a reasonable request to make. So in this case, managing his ADHD a bit better enabled him to be present for his wife more in the ways that she wanted him to. Or it becomes a thing where he says, look, I get it. It's still not a priority for me. For me, there's other things that are bigger priority. Now, what do we do? How do we sort this out? And those are the universal discussions. So the classic dynamic then, especially when one partner's ADHD is not well managed, is the sort of stereotypical dynamic of the underfunctioner and the overfunctioner. So partner who does not have ADHD becomes a big overfunctioner. They're the one who's taking care of everything, keeping track of everything, having to fret and think about everything. So that kind of mental workload of keeping the house and the family and everybody alive and pointed in the right direction. And the partner with ADHD winds up doing less and less, partially because they get distracted with other things, partially because the stuff they do gets taken away from them, right? Like, you're not doing that the way I want to. I guess I'll do it. Or I can't count on you to do it, so I guess I'll do it. So the imbalance just sort of goes and goes. And it makes sense. Like, you could understand easily how a couple could fall into that. And yet it ain't a good scene, right? Neither one of them is really loving it. And the sort of anger and the nagging and the avoidance and just feeling frustrated about the whole thing is completely understandable as well. So it's sort of like this death by a thousand cuts kind of scenario where the good feelings in the relationship, the time for fun, the desire to have fun together, including, sexual or otherwise, it just sort of bleeds out of the relationship, right? Like, you don't mean it, it just kind of goes there, which, by the way, is a struggle every relationship has to, put some effort into kind of keeping the good stuff at the top and not like the last thing that maybe perhaps happens if there's a bit of time. So the ADHD is the obvious contributor, right? It's the easy scapegoat. It's the easy target to hit, but it's not the only thing. It's still only half of the relationship. And frankly, it's less than half, but the partner with ADHD is only half of the relationship. The non-ADHD partner is still also half. So here's this idea that whoever wants something the least or the last has the power. So in other words, whoever has the, greatest tolerance for an overflowing trash can is the person who will take the trash out the least often. Um, However, the person who has the longest ability to wait is also the person who's going to get all the nagging, right? Because the person who has less ability to wait, they're going to hit their threshold a whole lot earlier, and they're going to start, I don't know, let's just say talking about their threshold and making their desires known to their partner. Makes sense, right? I get it. And yet this is the setup for that tug of war that's so easy to fall into when the two people in a couple see things differently or want things differently. So this is the trap. This is the setup for the trap of this sort of classic dynamic where the non-ADHD partner, because remember, they feel the future a little bit earlier, right? So when it's Monday and we know people are coming on Friday, they're the one who's like, oh, crap, we better start getting ready. Because actually, remember, okay, so on Tuesday and Thursday, one of the kids has soccer, but on Monday and Wednesday, the other one has baseball. So basically, none of those nights are really full nights. And actually, on Thursday, there's also that stupid back to school night thing where there's a test for chemistry on Friday. So, man, Thursday is going to be a long night. So, actually, like here we are Monday. Actually, it's not even Monday. Here we are on Sunday. Really, this is the day that we need to start thinking about Friday. And the partner with ADHD is sitting there thinking, I have no idea what you're talking about. We have like 5 days. Why are we even thinking about Friday? It's not even the end of this weekend. Why are we thinking about next weekend? But especially when the partner with ADHD is the guy and the non-ADHD partner is the woman, it even more so exacerbates that kind of gender imbalance that in heterosexual couples, often the wife is much more of the sort of caretaker and the coordinator of the relationship and the family. So she winds up taking on more and more. He winds up taking on less and less. And that is the setup for the chase. Unfortunately, at this point, like it's one thing if it's just a little bit out of kilter, like fine, I can be generous because, I love you and you're awesome and all that. It tips even more. And especially when there's kids and babies and people aren't sleeping and everybody's tired, like that generosity goes. And at that point, especially when things are really out of kilter and they're not communicating well, they're not negotiating, they're not problem solving, they're not sticking to what they agree with and what they agreed to, nobody brings their best to that moment. And I have a line that you can't expect your partner to behave better than you do. So if you're being kind of surly and aggressive, probably your partner is going to respond in some sort of a similar way. So as I mentioned before, I'm a big fan of medication. I'm a big fan of learning as much as you can about ADHD. Create really good, efficient systems, learn good tricks to manage your time, find the right kind of planner or schedule. All that stuff is great. It can take some of the pressure off. If there's a bit less chaos, a bit less just like living to the edge of the wire there, maybe you have a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more kind of room for generosity and like, let's actually connect and do something fun here. But it doesn't change the deeper dynamics, the deeper negotiations that every partner, every couple needs to work on. So again, back to that idea, it's not a different relationship. It's the same old stuff, just a bit more so. In any couple that has additional stressful demands, whether it's, a colicky newborn, loss of a job, sick parent, just, we had to move because of corporate, whatever, right? Like any additional demands and stress puts more pressure on the couple to be good teammates together. And especially if, with ADHD, because it's not a short one-time thing, it's an ongoing thing, even more important to work well together. So I think at this point, let's kind of talk about preferences versus limits. Or another way of putting it is, what do you want versus what do you need? So we all have preferences. I prefer it to be this way. Oh, interesting. I prefer it to be this way. And maybe actually I'll explain to you why, based on my family growing up, for good or bad reasons, this is why I prefer it this way instead of that way. A lot of things in life, a lot of the stuff that couples wrangle over it's not really factual. Like there's no facts about it. It's really about preferences. I prefer it to be this way. I prefer it to be that way. Now we can all make our case for why we think our way is the better way, and maybe it is for us, but it's not necessarily like a written in stone kind of a thing. And I think that this is important. If you're going to live with somebody else and have it be a good experience, a bit of flexibility, a bit of being clear about like really what is the thing that's important here? Is it how it's done or is it the end result? So, like, I don't know, my wife and I get into this thing where I'll load the dishwasher and she thinks she can load it, but like she moves stuff around because then you can put like one more spoon in there or something. I don't know. So kind of makes me crazy. Not worth the fight. I have better hobbies than moving things around in the dishwasher. You can knock yourself out. I'm not going to be a dick about it. And hopefully you're going to be nice about it too. So like, we're going to let that one go by. Now, by contrast, things like some things are limits, and limits are that small number of things of like, this is not acceptable to me. Like in good conscience, I can't be okay with this. So things like, I can't be okay with you being late to pick up our 9-year-old from soccer when they are the only person on a darkening field. Like that to me is not acceptable. That one I can't sign on to. You being late to meet your friends, fine. I don't care about that. But like picking up our kids when they're alone on a field, nope. That one I draw a line. But the thing is, you don't get 100 lines, right? I had a couple I was seeing, I was seeing the guy, and it was his job to clean up the kitchen at the end of the night. Great. Except every once in a while, he would leave like a few things in the sink. And for her, this was like this big kind of moral outrage. And all this other stuff got read into it. And it's just sort of like, dude, a couple bowls in the sink cannot be a limit. Like if that is a limit for you, you're very quickly going to run out of how many chips you can play. So we need to really be clear in our own heads about what's most important. And then from there, try to be flexible about the other things that maybe are not quite as important. Which brings us to sort of the two ways that we can manage anxiety. So there's external and internal. External anxiety management is, here's a thing I'm anxious about. I'm going to do something out here to make it be less anxiety provoking. So, I got that big meeting tomorrow. I think I'm going to take another look at my notes just to make sure I really got like all my ducks in a row, so I'm ready to roll on that. Or company's coming on Friday. I think I'm going to vacuum today because that way I don't have to worry about it as much later. Great. External anxiety management, definitely that. There are a lot of times in life where that's the right way to go. There's also, though, internal anxiety management, which is more of an inside job. In other words, this is not the time or place, at least for me, to do something about it. So my spouse is running late to meet their friends and I'm not a part of it. You know what? I wouldn't be late to meet my friends, but that's not my problem because they're not my friends and I'm not the one meeting them. I choose to let this one go. My spouse will figure this out on their own, or their friends will, or something somehow will happen, but I don't need to be a part of it. Right. So it's that thing of kind of picking your battles and knowing, is this a thing I got to do something about? Or is this a thing that I need to sort of like calm myself within myself? So what often happens then is because folks with ADHD don't feel that anxiety until they get a whole lot closer to whatever the thing is that's going to happen. They're feeling okay, right? Or they're dealing with the anxiety of the, whatever happened before that or whatever is about to happen, not what's going to happen 3 things from now. So they're sort of okay in the moment. But the partner is the one who feels the anxiety. And then they start to feel resentful about, why do I always have to be the one who feels the anxiety? I'm the one who's worrying about getting the kids' doctor's appointments before school begins. I'm the one who's worrying about what are we doing for Thanksgiving, even though it's 3 months away. So I think it's helpful at times like this to help individual partners, for oneself and for the other person, to be clear about like, look, what do you do in order to feel less anxious? What is helpful to you? What is less helpful? Are there other options? How do we work well together? So it's not just about getting things done. And it's not just about kind of checking boxes, but sometimes it's about being willing to sort of let a few things go. And not, this is total sweeping generalization, but the non-ADHD partner often too easily feels like they have to manage anxiety externally. The way for me to feel less anxious is I make sure everything gets done. It's not a crazy idea. It's a good idea in many ways, but it's not always the right idea. Sometimes the better way is to say, you know what? Not my problem. I choose to let that one go. And it's not letting it go out of defeat. It's letting it go so that you can prioritize that energy for some other things that maybe have a bit more importance. Maybe there's something more to be gained by putting your energy into something else. Which kind of brings us to that old chestnut, would you rather be right or happy? And I've got kind of two parallel truths here, which is you can't have, the first one is you can't have something done by someone else and also have them do it your way. So you might have to pick one or the other. If you're lucky, you can get both, but probably you got to pick one or the other. But the flip side of that, and again, I'll let you guys guess which partner these tend more often to refer to. So second parallel truth is you can't have too much done by someone else and also have them be happy about it. So, to say, oh, well, you like it done your way, so I guess you can do it. Oh, and you can do that too, and that and that and that. Oh, I guess I don't have anything to do. I'll watch TV. Not likely to fly in any kind of a long-term relationship. So the question then that all of us need to ask ourselves is, what's more important to me? And specifically, like, what kind of price am I willing to pay for it? If I want it done my way, in a certain way, maybe I just need to do it myself. Maybe that's kind of the price of admission. On the other hand, maybe it's more important that somebody else do it. Like, I'll be flexible on how it turns out or how it gets done or when, but like, I just don't want to be the one to do it. So fine, I'm going to let you do it. Or alternatively, I don't really care about this thing. It's not my thing. I'm not interested, but I am interested in having a spouse who's happy with me. So, okay, I'm going to take one for the team and I'll do it for them because, that's a decent thing to do. And that's the kind of spouse I want to be. And that's the kind of spouse I hope to get on the receiving end as well. So, okay, I can do this. Sometimes spouses get stuck between two bad options. And the sort of examples I put up here on the slide is, I don't want to keep nagging you, right? Bad option number one. But I also can't be okay with that bill not getting paid. So that's bad option number two. Both of those are bad. I don't like either one of those, but I don't know what else to do. Like, what do you want me to do? Right. So that's a scenario one. Or the flip side of that scenario is, I don't want you to feel anxious, right? Bad scenario number one. But I also can't guarantee that I'm going to get to that tomorrow, or I'm going to remember to do that tomorrow. So that's bad option number two. What do you want me to do? Let's really kind of talk about this. Both of these are bad. What's our third alternative that maybe we can both feel good about? And what I like about this idea of kind of giving away your dilemma is that when we get stuck in those moments, we're really racking our brain trying to figure out how to make this thing work. We can't really make it work, right? Like, there's no good option. The good, easy, obvious options aren't on the table. They're not available. So let's really kind of talk about it. Let's think about it. How do we do this in a way? If the new person could mute whoever that is. So what it does is it gets into much more of an effective problem solving conversation. Like, let's really talk about this. How do we do this in a way that we both feel good about? And this is a conversation of equals. It's not a conversation where one person tells the other what to do. It definitely avoids blame, right? It's not saying you, right? It's what can we do here? Here's the thing, we both play a part in it. What can we both do to make this better? So, let's see if I can find that person there. All right, cool, muted again. So, especially if ADHD is a bit new in your life, by which I mean the diagnosis, ADHD itself won't be new, but I think really understanding it, like, absolutely with knowledge comes power. And whether you're learning about it from, awesome meetings like this or books, podcasts, webinars, the national conference, whatever, right? Learn about it. Do not reinvent the wheel. Do not figure it out the hard way. Lots of other people have come before you. Figure out what works. Don't make it about should, don't make it about morality. Don't compare yourself to the neighbors because you don't actually know what's going on in the neighbor's relationship. And let's really focus on some good systems and strategies with maybe a little bit of the right medication thrown in to make it much more likely that you can actually create a situation that works well. When ADHD is better managed, it kind of quiets some of the noise and the chatter. It makes it easier to focus on the things that are most important. We know well about ADHD that folks with ADHD tend to do a bit better when they function in an environment with plenty of reminders and plenty of structure, right? It just sort of keeps them on track. It reminds them of that stuff that kind of falls out of working memory or falls out of their attention or awareness. So setting alarms, putting up signs, other things like that one can do for oneself, great. But also sometimes if one person is really good at remembering things and the other person's not as good at remembering things, like, look, let's go with the strengths we got here, right? And the person who remembers might be good if they, give some friendly reminders. Hey, honey, don't forget, blah, blah, blah. The thing of it is, it needs to be a situation of working with, not working for. If it feels like this, right, where it's like parent child, God forbid, or like, boss employee, even worse, that's probably not a relation most people want to be a part of, right? We're both adults, we're both equals. Let's treat each other as such. So reminders need to be given respectfully, but they also need to be taken respectfully. So for the non-ADHD partner, don't wait for resentment to slowly pile up until you're like ready to burst, because it will absolutely come out in your tone. So say it nicely, say it earlier in terms of the reminders and the little gentle pokes. And then show a bit of appreciation if they actually follow through, right? A bit of appreciation, always a good thing if it's genuine. For the partner who has ADHD, like, I know this is easier said than done, but like, don't cop out in the moment. Like, I really should do that thing, but I don't feel like doing it. I'll just do this other thing real fast and then I'll go do that, which is a setup for, oh crap, I forgot to do that. So make an active choice to do it. I said I would do this. This is important to my partner. I don't care about it. This is not the time I would do it, but here we are. Let's go. I'm just going to do this. We're going to get it done. We're moving on to better things, because this is the partner that I want to be. They're not making me do it. They're not guilting me into doing it. I, of my own free will, am choosing. This is important. I see how we both will benefit. I'm going to make a choice here to do it. And if you drop the ball, and you will sometimes, then just fix it, right? Actively address it, give a good apology, make some amends, figure out what you can do to get things on a better track. As tempting as it is to run and hide, it only makes a bad situation worse. So, often, especially more so in the beginning of therapy with a particular couple or client, I spend a lot of time talking about like the sort of superficial stuff. So in other words, like the basics of creating just like a little bit of an easier lifestyle. So things like getting enough sleep, eating sort of a healthy-ish diet, trying to exercise sometimes. It's not magic. It doesn't solve all of life's problems, but it really sets a bit of a better foundation. So, sometimes that means getting medication sorted out, maybe working with a coach or an organizer to create some better systems so that you're not like always kind of like living on the edge of the avalanche. Certainly, some individual or couples therapy I think could be helpful. Um, and then from there, with a little bit more kind of breathing room, a little bit more of a positive mood, because you're not like frazzled to the edge, it's a lot easier to do some of that other deeper work that, is like the really serious therapy, as my old program would have called it. So, um, like it's hard to get into the deeper stuff if you're just struggling to keep your head above water on the day-to-day stuff. Um, Especially when ADHD isn't well managed, and especially if we're talking about, current day adults. If you're older than 35, maybe 40, it's pretty unlikely that you were diagnosed and treated as a kid. So you spend a lot of your life as an unmanaged ADHD, undiagnosed, and struggling with everything that comes from that. And there's potentially a lot that can come from it in terms of how do you see yourself? How do you relate to other people? Then you get into a relationship. And again, both people can feel that same sense of powerlessness. What we keep trying doesn't work. Even when we try it more, it still doesn't work. So the question then becomes, how do we begin to shift this? How do we understand it? And really understanding ADHD and all the many ways that it impacts you, your partner, your relationship can really put you into a much better position of knowing what's worth trying to change. What do I need to accept about my partner or myself or our relationship, or even just this stage of life that we're in? But that is a much better place to be, because at least then at that point, you have some ability to kind of think about it and kind of make an active choice for yourself, rather than feeling like the choice is sort of like foisted upon you. On a first date, or better yet, if you're just chatting somebody up on a dating app, if anything uncomfortable or problematic comes up, boom, you're out. No problem. Like no harm, no foul, you're gone. And then the relationship progresses along, if it does. And now you've got maybe a mortgage, maybe a couple of kids, maybe you're completely intertwined, and God damn it, you really love the person, even though you want to kill them sometimes, right? Like, that is a hard place to be, right? Because you're not happy staying, but you don't see yourself being happy going either. So, in that situation, between sort of in that moment for couples where we feel caught between the hammer and the anvil, there's basically two ways to find happiness. One, and this is the path some people take, and perhaps for the best, is to find a way to tolerate leaving. Like, look, this just isn't working. Fundamentally, we're too different in too many ways. I don't see our happiness really overlapping, or at least mine. I need to go and do something different. But perhaps, and especially if there's kids involved, maybe there's a way to find a maybe there's a way to make it actually worth staying. And it is this moment that especially kind of pushes us to become a better person. That you can't keep doing what you're doing. You can't stay stuck in the old ways. You can't keep hoping that your partner is going to make all the changes that you want them to make, right? It's like in that moment that we look to ourselves and say, okay, what can I do different here? I'm not powerless. I'm not a victim. I have some influence here, and I want to take it, and I want it to be a positive influence. And the reason, part of then what makes relationships positive in an ongoing way is not just the sort of romantic part of the relationship, and that is absolutely important, but also the kind of sexual part of the relationship. And if we kind of broaden this out a little bit more, it's sort of the fun part of the relationship, the part that's not just about buying groceries and making sure bills get paid. And when you look at the couples who really are the happiest, right, that they're happy in their relationship in general, they're happy in their sex life, and they're happy in terms of how often they have sex, they tend to overlap quite a bit. And the reason why they do is in order to have good sex with your partner, you got to behave well outside of bed, in bed too, but also outside of bed. But also, if you have that good connection, right, you're not just, business partners in the, in the family, so to speak, but you're also people who enjoy each other, who are friends, who bring out the fun part of each other. Um, that good connection also brings out better behavior, right? It's easier to kind of give your all to the team in every way when you feel like your partner is also bringing their better part to the team. So this whole idea of the importance of looking at not just how a couple does in their relationship, but also in their sex life. That's kind of what led me to the research I did. And then ultimately my fourth book here, ADHD After Dark, Better Sex Life, Better Relationship. I sort of felt like the fun part of life, the sexual part of these relationships was being kind of ignored in the field. And I really wanted to use that as a powerful intervention to help, I don't know, find more motivations to work on the relationship so both partners can be happy. A diagnosis of ADHD, especially if it comes later in life, can be a total game changer. I mean, not everybody responds quite as well to medication or systems or whatever, but it really can make a difference that means something. And I think part of that, again, especially if you've been together for a while before ADHD got diagnosed, is to recognize that the things that happen between you and your partner that you don't enjoy, it may not just be your partner, that they might be that there's that couples dynamic, that sort of polarizing where you push each other further out. You bring out more of the parts of your partner that are not their best, just as they're bringing out the parts of you that are not your best, right? So it's not that they're bad and it's not that you're bad. It's just that these ways that we get stuck, they're bad. And we can find some better ways to work well, to work better together in this. Sometimes we need to look back at the past and really kind of mourn it, like let go of all those years that things were not the way that we would have wanted them to be. Maybe even more in the future that we were hoping for, that like, you know what, I don't think that's going to happen. But what can we do to make a future that's good, maybe in some other ways? And to really kind of focus on right now, what can I do? What can you do? What can we do together to make this into a better situation? So, quick sales pitch. The big ADHD conference this year, sponsored by Chad, along with ADA and ACO, is going to be online November 4th to the 6th. So if you go to chadd.org, which is one of the sponsoring organizations, you can kind of click through. It's a conference that's meant for both clinicians and consumers. So there's a really awesome kind of sharing of information and kind of cross-pollination of ideas. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at it. There's a ton of information. I'm doing a couple sessions, lots of other great speakers. So definitely check that out. And finally, then, my website, where I've got a bunch of information, including sample chapters and recordings and other things, is adultadhdbook.com. And with that, I will then stop my screen share and let's do some discussion here. Let's talk it out. So I'm not sure how we want to do this. So, all right. So Ellen, how do we want to do this? I saw, all right. So in the chat, so somebody said, I feel like the ADHD person is getting blamed most of the time. Don't think it's fair. I'm very self-aware, but cannot take medication. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. The person with ADHD kind of, I won't say they volunteer to be an easy target, but there are things about ADHD that make them an easy target. And the problem with easy targets is they draw all the fire, they take all the focus and all the blame, and there's no relationship that's as simple as one person. So, but the other side of it is, if you're the other person, in order to say, this is all your fault, you need to do something different, you're basically crossing your fingers and just hoping that they will, as opposed to, no, actually, I'm half this relationship. There are some things I can do different here. There are some things that I want to improve. And if I do some things different, they're probably going to have some influence on what you do. And that's a good thing, I think. So if I do some things differently, maybe you'll do some things differently too. Maybe we'll both be happier. Personally, I'd rather have a bit of influence on what happens to me and not just kind of hope for the best that my wife is going to somehow figure out how to do some things differently. Um, in terms of the comment of, not being able to take medication, I mean, there are some people who are unfortunately are not, for some variety of different reasons, might not be able to take medication for ADHD. I would want to be sure about that. So depending on who you ask, so they actually know what they're talking about. But sometimes that is the case. And if so, then you need to find some other ways. You just need to work that much harder to manage it, and to find other ways to contribute to the relationship and to the world, despite the fact that this ADHD stuff still keeps showing up. But any other comments or questions? I don't see anything else in the chat, but I'm not sure if people pose questions some other way.
I'm not seeing any other questions either. It is a little bit later than, well, it's just on time, Ari. That was good time management. So does anyone else have any questions? Or, I mean, it's a lot, I have to say, it's a lot to kind of process and absorb and integrate. And there's a lot of different pieces that you've been talking about. I guess what a lot of people I find are interested in are okay, how do we talk to each other? How do we communicate? He won't listen to me. She won't listen. She wants to, all this back and forth stuff. So I'm wondering if people are interested in hearing about that, if maybe you could say a little something.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good topic. So, I think that, for a couple who's been around for a while, the problem is we don't really hear each other, right? Because let's be honest, we've had all the same arguments like 100 times, because life's not that unique that all of a sudden we're having like a brand new argument, right? It's like it's the same arguments, because the stuff that we figured out a way to resolve is done. We don't need to argue about it. What we're left with is the stuff that we have yet to find a way to resolve between us. And the problem is, we then, like, we all know the script, right? We can all write out, well, I say this and you say this, and then I say that and you say that, right? So we don't really hear what our partner is saying, and we sort of jump ahead quickly. So I think a big part of these discussions is really like slowing it down, like really kind of slow it down, less assumptions, less guessing, and more questions, like, tell me about that. Why do you feel that? What makes you think that? Where do you think that comes from? What part of what I'm doing is contributing to that? And sometimes being able to hear what our partner says without feeling like we need to kind of jump in and put our perspective in. So it's bigger than just that kind of active listening. What I hear you saying is blah, 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 parrot back. But it's to really try to sort of understand it from your from your partner's perspective. This is how they see it. And then from there, try to begin to kind of shift it a little bit, and to really try to understand each other and to find some ways that work a bit better than what you've been doing.
Which of course requires flexibility and the ability to manage one's emotionality.
Yeah. And that's where like calling timeouts is really helpful. Now, the thing about a timeout is I'm taking a break and then I'm coming back, right? Key second half of that statement, and then I'm coming back. Now, that could be, I just need a few seconds and I just need to kind of get my head back on. Or it means I'm going to walk away and I'm going to calm myself down and then I'm going to come back. Right. It could mean that. So sometimes a timeout lasts a little bit longer, and that's fine. Um, but it's better to have a slower conversation that takes longer, that actually gets somewhere, than it is to have a quick conversation that ends up in the ditch. So taking breaks and really kind of calming oneself down, I think it is a really important part of that. So there's
Yeah, I was going to say this is a good time to make a pitch for all the things that we can do, like activity, eating right, being outside, getting enough sleep, all the things that help just to regulate whether you have ADHD or not. All of them are so important. And I am a big advocate, as you know, of mindfulness and meditation. So I'm going to throw that in.
I mean, all of that stuff's true, right? Now, the challenge, of course, is when a couple isn't managing ADHD well, whether it's one of the spouses or let's throw in a couple of kids as well, it's that much harder to just kind of keep your head above water. And then these good habits of enough sleep and eating well and exercise and mindfulness and whatever, like those are often some of the first things to go. But I think what it speaks to, and this is easy to say, but it's that like we really need to prioritize that self-care stuff. Because if you're running on fumes, you're not going to bring your best to those conversations. And then a bad situation goes even worse. So finding some ways to carve at least a little bit of time out to kind of calm yourself down, and a little bit of time out to kind of enjoy each other as a couple. So it's not just about, the business of the family.
So Ari, I'm looking at the time, and we usually try to stop at 9:15. But if anyone has any other questions, or I mean, I could probably keep asking questions, but coming from someone else would be great. Why don't you put it in the chat, or do you want people to just unmute themselves? What would work for you, Ari? And if people have to leave, we certainly understand.
Yeah. There are a couple direct messages I got in the chat. So let me at least briefly answer a couple of them. And then if people got to go, then I totally understand that. But so there's a question here. What do you suggest for a couple on the brink of divorce? They've tried a bunch of couples therapists. It happens, sometimes the differences really are kind of too big to bridge. But I guess, what I would hope for or what I would wonder and then maybe hope for is, to what extent was ADHD identified and managed during any of these couples therapy times? I'm going to make a guess, probably not, maybe, but so that's definitely a pretty good point of intervention. Trying to see if you can find a couples therapist who actually understands ADHD, because I think if they don't, it's a setup for the ADHD partner to be made out to be the bad guy who doesn't get their homework done, so to speak, and the therapy is not going to be effective. I might wonder also, I don't know, maybe ADHD is not the only thing that's going on here in one or both partners, right? Maybe there's other things that need to be addressed more effectively in order to make the couples therapy more effective. So, I think that hopefully there are some kind of stones to turn over that, potentially could be more effective. So you actually feel like you're getting somewhere. And there's a question. So sort of the gist of it. So it sounds to me like this is the non-ADHD partner who comes up with lots of kind of helpful ideas and strategies and stuff, and their partner with ADHD doesn't do it, doesn't use the stuff. And this non-ADHD partner is feeling really frustrated. So I've got a bunch of thoughts. I mean, one possibility, again, I'm going to come back to medication. If they're not on the right medication, that might really make it harder for them to stick to these things. I might also wonder, actually, is what you're trying to sell them not something they're interested in buying, right? Like, are these things of interest to them? Because if they're not, I don't know. It's a hard sell to get someone to do something that they're not interested in doing. So maybe what you need to do is step back and ask them, like, what's important to you? What are you trying to work on here? What would you like to see a little bit better? What can I do to facilitate that? Right. So kind of step back and ask them rather than sort of sticking ideas onto them if they don't want them. And some of it might be to kind of step back and let them, I don't know, suffer some of their own consequences, right? Like, I'm not going to remind you about things. That's your thing to do. If it doesn't directly affect me, I'm not reminding you. I wish you the very best of luck. I love you. I don't want to be frustrated. I don't want to chase you. So these other things, like, those are on you. And I'm not saying that in a malicious way, but rather if they do it and they manage it, awesome, mission accomplished. And if they don't, if they continue to struggle and fall short, maybe then they feel more of the consequences rather than you feeling the stress of it. And now perhaps they might be a little bit more motivated to try some of these ideas that you're coming up with. But it's hard if one person wants it more, it's hard to get the other person on board with it. So sometimes we need to know when to kind of step back in the relationship and let our partner figure it out for themselves. So otherwise, I don't know. Any other kind of final thoughts? Ellen, where did you go? You move your box moved. There you are. So, but I guess, the other thing I would suggest is keep learning, keep showing up to meetings, keep supporting each other. I think one of the things that's really great about these CHAD meetings, especially when they're actually in person, is not just the meeting, it's the pre-meeting and the post-meeting, right? It's you had a good meeting when it spills into the parking lot and a half hour later after the library has closed where you held the meeting in the basement for free, everybody's still out there talking, right? Like, that is the best part of the meeting. So when you can show up in person, be there for each other, ask questions, offer ideas. Like, that is the thing that really makes these meetings, I think is the cherry on top. So whatever the, online digital version of that is, find some ways to do it. So otherwise, I don't know. Are you going to close this out, or what are we doing here?
Yeah, we're going to thank you. This was wonderful. It feels like there's so much more to hear. We can go like this, or we can applaud you, whatever. It's really so much appreciation and gratitude for you finally coming to Bergen County CHAD. And I'm sure the feedback that I'm going to get from people is very positive, and we probably want more, Ari. So maybe you'll come speak again and talk more about I'd like to hear more about the communication and how to communicate. I think a whole session could be devoted to that. It's such a challenge for people.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, so yeah. And certainly once we're actually back in person on everything, yeah, we'll find a time. I'll come on up. Maybe we'll do something like weekend adjacent, and we'll do something in person. It'll be fun.
That would be great. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Anybody wants to write their thanks in the chat, of course you can, or you can write to me at adhd.bergencounty@gmail.com. And I hope to see you all next month. Tentatively, next month, we have Michelle Frank, who's going to do a Q&A. She said she's very pregnant, and she's just like, she doesn't have the head to do a whole formal presentation, but she's fabulous, and she's very interested in talking about women. And she's also been talking about the Gottman method for marriage counseling and for couples. So come with your questions, write to me some questions so that maybe I start to get things stimulated and thinking about for her. Okay, so everyone have a good night. Ari, thank you so much, really. And we'll see you all soon. Have a great night. Thanks
See
again.
everybody.
I think, Ari, you should look in the chat. You can stop the recording.